Hello everyone, Miles here, one of the co-founders of Iconic. I'm joined today by Nazima Kadir, who I'm going to ask straight out of the gate to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about your from that trajectory that you've taken from from study through to now leading a UX practice. Can you share any? I mean, you've kind of alluded to a few, but any moments or projects across that experience that you're particularly proud of?
I mean, I have to say I've been really lucky in that I've had very, very, very different types of research that I've done. So I did this one project, for example, where I was interviewing women in different parts of the UK around around their daily habits in the home, and kind of tracking how much time they spent, what did they do and how much time they spent. And in the end, being able to make a connection between the amount of domestic work that women do and the pressure on their knees and their hips, right? And to just be able to make because there was this big, for that project, for that client, there was a big mystery as to why women had much more severe knee and hip pain than men, and why women were disproportionately having hip replacement surgeries, and to kind of think about the fact that because of gender inequality with housework, with domestic work, and having a lifetime of that would make an impact on people's on how they age and their health. And that was a pretty interesting project. But I've been very lucky because I've done projects all over the world, and for each of those projects there's so much I've learned, much of which have been applicable to the client's problem, but also it's just stuff that's really interesting to learn as an anthropologist, I have to say.
Yeah, again, really an incredible project. And it sounds like all of this sort of diversity of research is highly applicable and has sculpted the way that you're approaching research in organizations like JP Morgan. And we're going to get to that in a minute, because that's really the nexus of what your talk is about. How do we apply these skills in work? And I'd love to get onto that in a minute. But you've come from the academic world. You're applying a lot of this, these different experiences to the work you're doing now. Are there any key influences in the research world, be it academic, be it sort of projects you've worked on, that really helped progress your career as a researcher?
Well, in terms of, that's interesting. That's an interesting question. In terms of, I think, my doctoral work was all about analyzing hierarchy and authority in a community that defined itself against hierarchy and authority, right? And what is the skill set from that is that whenever I go into any situation, I always, whether it's successful, whether I do it successfully or unsuccessfully, is I try to understand how the place works. What's the structure of the place? What's the explicit structure? What's the, let's say, the hidden structure, right? And that thinking, that type of thinking, comes from these two scholars who I used a lot in my dissertation, which was Pierre Bourdieu and Irving Goffman, right? And I don't know if I would ever want to inflict Pierre Bourdieu on a UX audience, right? But in terms of reading him, which is let's just say not the most UX friendly experience, but his ideas are amazing, right? His ideas, this understanding of habitus, which is that your body is a history of the structure that you grew up in, right? That there's this idea that how you move, how you talk, how you dress, everything communicates something, and that it takes a lot of work to kind of overcome that history. And why do you even need to overcome it, right? And to think about all of these like maybe unconscious ways that we reproduce systems that we might not want to, and that actually might hurt us in the end, I think are super, super interesting for all of us to think about, especially when you're working in a really complex field. And Irving Goffman is an organizational sociologist who, again, well, his books are a little bit more easy to read, but his work is based on having lived and worked in mental institutions in the Shetland Islands. And his work is so interesting because what he does is he talks about the fact that, people have this perception that if someone is characterized as insane, that they no longer have any control of what they do and they say. And he actually really shows that all of us are constantly changing our behaviors, our actions according to the situation we're in, right? And he would use the example of people who were considered quote unquote insane to kind of show that how that people's behaviors were modulated according to the context and according to how they were treated.
So if you call someone insane, they're going to act insane, right? Essentially.
But also the type of insane behavior shifts, right? And he's amazing giving examples like, when does someone throw their feces at you versus not? It's not like someone's insane and therefore they behave a certain way. It's like if they're being treated badly, if they're not getting enough personal space, right? If they don't have good food, and I know for me that's very, very influential in terms of thinking about when you're interacting with people from all walks of life. How do you think about how you behave, but also what are the factors that impact how they react to you and react to their environment?
Super fascinating, and thanks so much for going into the depths of that. If you haven't heard of these I guess you'd call them anthropologists, psychologists, I don't know,
sociologists,
yeah. Check them out, and I'll try maybe Nazima, we can tag them in our post later so people can go check them out. But really, what we're here to talk about today, and segueing quite nicely off of what we were just talking about, is this concept of unconventional ethnographic skills and how they can be applied from what you've done in the past to what you're doing now. I'd love for you, without putting words in your mouth, I'd love for you to share a bit more about that topic and really what's inspired this.
Well, I guess actually what inspired this came from last year when I spoke during Product Design Week. And I actually spoke about nudge theory, right? I talked about the decline of nudge theory. But before that, I gave a little bit of an introduction about my own bio, very similar to the one I just gave in this talk, in this recording. And afterwards, a couple people were like, what's happening here? Like, you live with anarchist squatters and now you work at JP Morgan? Like, I don't understand how that works. And so luckily you and I were having chats about that. And I was like, I could talk about that, and you're go for it. And so I guess what's interesting to think about is it's just to think of why have I been able to be in an organization like JP Morgan, which is, an institution, a banking institution, actually a global institution in many ways, when my background has been of people who reject institutions, reject capitalism, right? And now have been at JP Morgan for 5 years. What are the transferable skills from that kind of environment to this kind of environment? But also what are the kind of implicit assumptions under that question of how can you be in that environment and then be in this environment? And I think there is kind of an assumption around folks who are social scientists or anthropologists that we have a very particular value set that makes it kind of impossible to work in large institutions or corporations. And it's interesting because people don't have that kind of assumption about, for example, around engineers. Like an engineer, for example, could be an anarchist or a socialist and still work at a bank, and no one would really think, hey, why is that jarring? Because there's an assumption of technical distance, right? That kind of technical expertise gives distance from certain types of institutions and what their values are. And I think that there's an idea that social scientists can't have that kind of distance, right? So that's one like assumption that I think is really interesting. Another assumption that I like to question is the idea that working in a university is an anti-capitalist act. I personally think that universities are very capitalist institutions, right? And these really big institutions have lots of dynamics and lots of services and have lots of power and influence, right? So I personally really enjoy working in a place that's so global and that's so inclusive in many ways, right? And just has so much going on. Like there is a art history curator at JP Morgan. There is a museum inside of JP Morgan. There's an art collection, right? So there's a lot going on. Obviously, like JP Morgan's really well known for diversity and its investment in diversity, right? Which is quite interesting, which aligns with my values.
Thank you for that answer. And looking at this talk from the outside, or from the inside out, actually, it's obviously at the BAD conference. It's November 13th, which is all about behavior and design. But I'd love to get a sense from your perspective, crafting this talk. Who is it for, and what do you hope attendees will be able to take away from your presentation and apply to their work?
Well, I think it's for UXers, right? And as someone who's currently leading a UX team and obviously has been working UX for a while, what I find is that people in UX come from all kinds of backgrounds, right? So like people who are working as designers often come from art backgrounds. Obviously, people who are working in research come from all kinds of backgrounds as well, but obviously academia. I have a wonderful design friend who was a librarian, right? And just to kind of be able for us to think about those backgrounds, the richness of those backgrounds as being part of our practice, right? Instead of it being something like, you are a librarian and then you transition to being a designer and then you don't give up on that. That actually all those skill sets, all that knowledge infuses that work, right? All these different contexts. If you're an artist and you're, say, a practicing artist, it's part of your work, right? It's not so compartmentalized, right? And that you don't, you can be in all these different spaces and do different kinds of work, but still be a whole person who's doing, do you see what I mean? Like it's not so separate. So that's kind of what I wanted to explore.
Awesome. And with that topic coming to light now, obviously we've been talking about it for a year as well, but why do you think it would be quite an important subject for the current state of UX?
Well, I think obviously, the topic is what the impact of AI, right, in UX and in UX practices. And actually, I think for all of us in UX, there's always a method, a practice, a tool that we have to learn, right? Like UX is something that's always changing. It's not a skill set. It's not a practice that is fixed. And with AI, as with all the other tools that we need to be knowing about and need to be using, there's a constant change. There's a constant change in how we work and how we think. I mean, when I got into the world of commercial research a little over 10 years ago, the hot thing was semiotics. I don't think it's the hot thing anymore. Like, it's just, I don't see it anymore, right? Like, so, there are trends in terms of research and design that come and go, but there's also ways of thinking and ways of working, and they're constantly changing. So I think in many ways that UX, especially those of us who come from different kinds of backgrounds, we have an advantage because we have to have that flexibility and adaptability.
Yeah, 100%. No two research studies look the same, right? That's just the way it is. And you touched on AI there. Looking ahead at the future of this craft, are there any, AI included or whatever, but what excites you about that future for UX, and any trends and kind of technologies that are going to be shaping the way that we work for the future?
Well, I think that, like, especially in the world of research, there's always been a lot of, I hate to say it this way, but I'm going to say it this time, waste. As in, like, like I used to run projects where, we'd have teams of researchers go to 5 different countries and do, like, bunch of different studies and interview this many people. And you would use maybe 10% of all that research, use about 10% of it for the client. And the other 90%, where did it go? And I'm hoping that the tools are going to be coming out of with AI will be able to consolidate, store, and make all that information, especially qualitative information, more accessible, more usable, and just, for all of us who want to use research, who have research-based practices, so that we could use it with our partners more. We could use it in terms of to inform all the kind of decisions that we're making constantly.
You're the second research leader I've spoken to who's said almost the same thing about, like, how can AI help us, in tying down some of this research that gets lost, consolidating, and it really can. This is the promise of AI, I think, in research. So maybe we need to create these tools ourselves in the research domain. Amazing. And I'm going to close out our interview today with just a few more sort of personal questions, and a bit of fun as well, because we all like to have fun. So I wanted to start with a question about yourself. How do you stay inspired, ahead of the curve in terms of your understanding of new research trends or techniques, and generally keep those creative juices flowing?
Honestly, I'm a culture vulture. So I live in London, which is like a cultural capital of the world. And every week I go see a film, I go to an exhibition, or I go to the theater. And that, like, for me, just keeps me, I think, really, I mean, I feel like this is totally unconventional, but I feel like that keeps me up to date, because, like, that constantly pushes my head. It constantly pushes how I think and understand the world. And also living in a city like London, where there's so many contrasts, and London isn't one city, but it's like 50 cities in one, and being always, like, interacting with all kinds of people every single day from where I live to the bank, it just helps keep me on my toes in terms of that adaptability and flexibility.
I love that. Yeah, I'm a Londoner, so I'm used to that diversity in London, and I think it's inspiring. But for people who are coming up through or entering this industry as a researcher, as a UX kind of designer, any advice that you would give to them that either helped you or you wish you'd known?
When I was transitioning from the academia to the world of commercial research, the best piece of advice was to package up a case study, right, of your work. And, it can be anything, but it could just be like a way of formatting your work, like something very, very quick, very easy, that shows the depth of your thinking in a format that people who are working commercially are used to, right? And it doesn't have to be complex, right? But it's a way to show off your thinking and to show, like, what is the problem? How did you go around designing your study, and what are the insights and implications of what you're doing? And that's a pretty good way of, it helps when you start knocking on doors.
Yeah, that the ability to communicate what you're doing concisely and in the language of the business is just fundamental. If you're interested, if anyone's listening and interested to learn more about that, we have 2 days all about communicating value, understanding design, business strategy to have more impact. So check out days 1 and 2, as well as coming to see Nazima on the 3rd day at BAD. My last 2 questions, and they'll be quick and punchy. Tell us a fun fact about you that people might not know.
A fun fact about me is that I'm a keen cyclist. I love, but I don't go fast. I just go, and I cycle partially out of partially because I love it, partially because I believe that public space should be accessible to all kinds of people with all kinds of bodies, and that and so it should be safe, it should be accessible, and that the only way you make that change in the world is by doing it. I think the reason why I say that because I think people look at me and they don't think that I'm the kind of person who cycles through London, but I am the kind of person who cycles through London because there's a kind of an idea of what is a London cyclist, and so I am a London cyclist. So I kind of like to tell people that that's part of what I do, but also about my values.
That's great, and you don't need to be lycra'd up and
Yep.
Racing helmet and racing bike to enjoy the streets of London. I'm also a keen cyclist, so I love that. And my last question: if you weren't a researcher, could you think off the top of your head what you might have been?
So I was almost a lawyer, almost, and I'm glad I'm not. I think that was probably the trajectory I was in before I went abroad after I was an investigator.
Amazing. Well, we're glad to have you in the research world. So thanks for making that call. Nazima, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk through your background, your upcoming talk. And any last final words you want to leave people with, or any tips for those looking to attend your talk at Product Design Week?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you're going to come to my talk afterwards, let's chat. I'd love to meet you.
That's the whole other side to this event. It's not just about the content; it's about meeting people, making those connections. So come on down. Product Design Week, the BAD conference on Wednesday, the 13th of November. You'll meet Nazima. You'll meet myself. We'd love to welcome you along. Nazima, from me and the team at Iconic, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you later this year.
I'm excited.
See you there.